Grace Millane was a bright, adventurous young woman from Essex, England, who had always harbored a deep love for travel. At 22, with her university degree in hand, she embarked on a solo backpacking journey around the world, a journey she had meticulously planned and eagerly anticipated. Her travels took her through South America and finally to New Zealand, a country she had dreamed of exploring. Grace was the kind of person who embraced life fully, capturing her experiences through photos and social media posts, sharing every moment with her family and friends back home. As she arrived in Auckland in late November 2018, she was filled with excitement for the adventures that awaited her in this new and beautiful land. Unbeknownst to Grace, her journey of discovery and new friendships would tragically be cut short, plunging her family into a nightmare and sending shockwaves around the world. Grace's time in New Zealand began like any other leg of her journey, full of exploration and meeting new people. On December 1st, 2018, she decided to spend the evening with a man she had met through a dating app. The two met in downtown Auckland, where they visited several bars before heading to a hotel together. Grace, ever the social butterfly, shared a few messages with her friends and family, keeping them updated on her whereabouts and activities. But then, without warning, the messages stopped. Her family, who had been following her travels closely, grew concerned when Grace failed to respond to their birthday wishes the next day. What should have been a day of celebration quickly turned into a day of dread as they realized that something was terribly wrong. As the hours passed with no word from Grace, her parents, David and Gillian Millane, began to panic. Their daughter, who had always been diligent about keeping in touch, had gone silent. The Millane family reported her missing, and the New Zealand police quickly launched an investigation. The initial stages were frantic, as investigators worked to trace Grace's last known movements. CCTV footage from the night she was last seen provided crucial clues, showing her walking through the busy streets of Auckland with the man she had met online. The footage captured them entering a hotel together, but from that point on, Grace seemed to have vanished without a trace. As the police investigation intensified, the man in the footage was identified as Jesse Kempson, a 26-year-old local. Detectives brought Jesse in for questioning, hoping to piece together what had happened after the pair entered the hotel. Jesse, initially calm and cooperative, told police that he had left Grace in his hotel room the following morning, believing she had simply left on her own. But something about his story didn't add up. The more the detectives pressed, the more inconsistencies began to emerge. Forensic evidence collected from the hotel room suggested that Grace had never left the room alive. Bloodstains, signs of a struggle, and the discovery of Grace's belongings in the room painted a grim picture. But the investigation took a darker turn when police discovered CCTV footage showing Jesse purchasing cleaning supplies and renting a car the day after Grace disappeared. The case took a devastating turn when detectives followed Jesse's trail out of the city to a remote area outside Auckland. There, in a shallow grave hidden in dense woodland, they found the body of Grace Millane, packed tightly into a suitcase. The discovery was met with an outpouring of grief and horror, not just from Grace's family, but from people all over the world who had been following the case. What began as a young woman's journey of a lifetime had ended in unspeakable tragedy, and the hunt for justice was only beginning. With the discovery of Grace Millane's body, the investigation quickly shifted from a missing person case to a murder inquiry. The police zeroed in on Jesse Kempson, the last person known to have seen Grace alive. The evidence against him was mounting, and the once calm demeanor he exhibited during initial questioning began to crack under the pressure. Detectives reviewed hours of CCTV footage, mapping out Jesse's movements in the days following Grace's disappearance. His actions were coldly calculated, buying cleaning supplies, renting a car, and driving out to the secluded area where he buried Grace's body. It was clear that Jesse had gone to great lengths to cover up his crime, but he had underestimated the thoroughness of the police investigation. Jesse continued to deny any wrongdoing, insisting that Grace's death had been an accident during consensual rough sex. But his story did not match the evidence. The forensic analysis of Grace's body told a different tale, one of violence and intentional harm. The marks on her neck were consistent with prolonged pressure, not the brief moment of force Jesse claimed. Investigators also uncovered disturbing details about Jesse's past. He had a history of manipulating women, often meeting them through dating apps and engaging in controlling and abusive behavior. Several women came forward with stories of their own encounters with Jesse, painting a picture of a man who was far from the charming, unassuming persona he presented. As the investigation continued, the police worked tirelessly to build a strong case against Jesse. They collected witness testimonies, forensic evidence, and digital footprints, all of which pointed to his guilt. The public and media closely followed every development, horrified by the details that emerged. Grace's death was a stark reminder of the dangers that can lurk behind the facade of seemingly ordinary individuals. The case also sparked a broader conversation about the risks associated with online dating and the need for greater awareness and safety measures. Grace Millane's family, devastated by their loss, watched from afar as the investigation unfolded, their grief compounded by the horrific nature of her death. The trial of Jesse Kempson began in November 2019, nearly a year after Grace Millane's murder. The courtroom was packed with journalists, members of the public, and representatives from both the Millane family and Jesse's defense team. The prosecution laid out a harrowing case, meticulously detailing the events leading up to Grace's death. They described how Jesse had lured Grace to his hotel room, manipulated her trust, and ultimately strangled her to death. The evidence was damning CCTV footage, forensic analysis, and testimony from experts who debunked Jesse's claims that her death was accidental. The defense, led by an experienced legal team, argued that Grace had consented the acts that led to her death and that her passing was a tragic accident rather than a premeditated murder. They pointed to Grace's own messages and internet searches evidence of her interest in consensual rough sex, trying to shift the narrative away from Jesse's culpability. However, the prosecution countered with the fact that even if Grace had consented to certain activities, she had not consented to being killed, and Jesse's actions after her death, his attempts to conceal the crime and dispose of her body, demonstrated a clear consciousness of guilt. As the trial progressed, the jury was presented with the full weight of the evidence. The prosecution called on several witnesses, including experts in forensic pathology, digital forensics, and psychological profiling, all of whom reinforced the view that Jesse acted with intent and malice. The emotional impact of the trial was profound, with Grace's parents sitting in the courtroom, listening to the details of their daughter's final moments. The trial's conclusion saw Jesse Kempson convicted of murder, and he was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum non-parole period of 17 years. The conviction brought a sense of justice for Grace's family, but it could never erase the pain of losing their daughter in such a brutal and senseless way. The case served as a stark reminder of the dangers that exist in the world, even for those who are simply seeking to explore it. Grace Millane's legacy, however, lived on not only in the memories of those who loved her, but also in the global conversations about safety, consent, and the importance of protecting the vulnerable. The conviction of Jesse Kempson for the murder of Grace Millane was met with a wave of relief and sorrow. For Grace's family, the trial's conclusion marked the end of a grueling journey through grief and the justice system, but it was only a small comfort in the face of their immense loss. The media continued to cover the story extensively, with public opinion largely condemning Jesse Kempson and reflecting on the broader implications of the case. Grace's parents, David and Gillian Millane, who had been steadfast throughout the trial, took the opportunity to speak out about the dangers their daughter faced. They wanted to ensure that Grace's death would not be in vain, and that her story would serve as a warning to others. In interviews and public statements, they emphasized the importance of safety when traveling and the potential risks associated with online dating. Their words resonated with many, sparking global conversations about consent, violence against women, and the need for increased awareness and education around these issues. In the aftermath of the trial, Grace's story became a symbol of the vulnerability that often goes unnoticed in everyday life. Many people were moved by her tragic fate, and vigils were held in her honor in both New Zealand and the UK. These gatherings brought communities together to mourn not just for Grace, but for all victims of violence and for the families who are left to pick up the pieces. The New Zealand government also responded to the case, initiating discussions on improving safety measures for travelers and implementing stricter regulations for the use of dating apps. The murder of Grace Millane highlighted the dark side of these platforms, where the potential for abuse and manipulation can lead to devastating consequences. The case served as a catalyst for change, prompting both users and developers to think more critically about the safety features and responsibilities associated with these technologies. Despite the international attention and the reforms that followed, nothing could bring Grace back to her family. David and Gillian Millane returned to England with the heavy burden of their loss, but they remained committed to honoring their daughter's memory, and they established a foundation in Grace's name, dedicated to supporting victims of violence and advocating for the safety of young travelers. Through this work, they sought to ensure that Grace's legacy would be one of empowerment and protection for others who, like her, sought to explore the world with open hearts and minds. The final chapter of Grace Millane's story is one of resilience. Though her life was tragically cut short, the impact of her story continues to be felt around the world. The lessons learned from her case serve as a reminder of the dangers that can lurk beneath the surface seemingly innocent encounters, and the importance of vigilance, both on a personal and societal level. Grace Millane will be remembered not just for the horror of her death, but for the love of life that defined her journey and for the enduring efforts to prevent others from facing the same fate. The case took a devastating turn when detectives followed Jessie's trail out of the city to a remote area outside Auckland. There, in a shallow grave hidden in dense woodland, they found the body of Grace Millane, packed tightly into a suitcase. The discovery was met with an outpouring of grief and horror, not just from Grace's family, but from people all over the world who had been following the case. What began as a young woman's journey of a lifetime had ended in unspeakable tragedy, and the hunt for justice was only beginning.